Welcome to today's Explainer. We're about to unpack a truly fascinating and, honestly, kind of uncomfortable phenomenon about humanity's place in the animal kingdom. We're talking about the super predator paradox. Think about it. We often feel so disconnected from the wild, right? Yet we actually cast this massive, invisible shadow over the entire natural world. Today, we're diving into the hard science of exactly why animals react to us the way they do. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this scenario. You're just walking through a forest, or even just your local neighborhood park. Suddenly, a bird explodes out of the trees. A deer freezes with eyes the size of dinner plates before bolting, and a squirrel does that frantic start-stop-run, basically having a full-blown existential crisis. And why? Literally just because you exist. You're just standing there in your sneakers, eating a granola bar. Why are these creatures, many of which have sharp claws, venom, horns, and absolutely incredible speed, so utterly terrified of you? To answer that, we really have to contrast how we see ourselves with how nature sees us. We tend to view ourselves as pretty harmless, right? We're soft, relatively slow, hairless apes who might get winded just climbing a couple flights of stairs. But the animal kingdom? They see a very different reality. Our ancestors were relentless, terrifying, bipedal persistence hunters. We didn't even need to outrun a gazelle. We just jogged after it for hours in the midday heat until it literally collapsed from exhaustion. To an animal, a two-legged silhouette jogging at a medium pace in the distance was genuinely one of the most horrifying things imaginable. Which brings us to part one, the survival algorithm. You see, this fear isn't just some modern reaction to humans. Scientists use a term for this. It's called the landscape of fear. It's an absolutely foundational concept in behavioral ecology. Basically, it means that prey animals don't just react when a predator physically jumps out of the bushes at them. Instead, they calibrate their entire existence around the mere possibility of death. So their feeding patterns, where they decide to sleep, when they go down to drink water, all of that is actively shaped by the threat of predators. And early humans, we became a massive part of that daily calculation. If we trace this history back, it's wild to see how deep this goes. Millions of years ago, we entered that landscape of fear. During the Paleolithic era, our persistence hunting meant that the animals that didn't run from a human silhouette, well, they got eaten. The ones that did run away survived, reproduced, and passed that specific wariness on to the next generation. Fast forward thousands of generations, and this fear is now essentially a pre-programmed survival algorithm baked right into their DNA. It's not just a learned behavior anymore. It is a factory-installed instinct. Moving on to part two, the super predator. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is a wild study that came out of the University of Western Ontario back in 2016. Researchers played audio recordings out in the wild to see how animals would react. But they didn't play lions roaring or wolves howling. Nope, they played casual human conversation. Literally just the kind of idle chatter you'd hear at a bus stop. And the results were staggering. Mountain lions, actual apex predators, fled at more than twice the rate they fled from the sounds of other top predators. Bobcats, skunks, possums, they all bolted harder and faster from our voices. Even animals at the very top of the food chain have this deeply ingrained historical memory of us being a major threat. Because, well, we hunted them too. And this perfectly illustrates the core issue here, the unpredictability problem. In nature, knowing a predator's pattern is what keeps you alive. A deer knows wolves hunt at dawn and dusk. A fish knows to avoid the shallows when the heron feeds. But then, there's us, humans. We hunt in the morning, at night, in massive groups, or totally alone. We use spears, rifles, and drones. We hunt on land, in the water, and from helicopters. To the animal brain, we are a chaotic variable that simply cannot be solved. We don't fit into any neat natural predator category. And when an animal encounters an unsolvable variable, the only rational response is just maximum avoidance. And it's not just our unpredictable behavior either, it's our actual chemistry. Sure, we carry around a potent cocktail of synthetic chemicals, deodorants, laundry detergents, plastics that are totally alien to natural ecosystems. But get this, even our natural body odor is terrifying to them. When researchers left scent strips soaked in human sweat near wildlife cameras, animal activity dropped just as much as when they left strips soaked in mountain lion urine. Think about that. Just you existing, giving off the normal odor of being alive, triggers the exact same panic response as an apex predator's scent. Let's pivot to part three, the habituation exception. So you might be wondering, what about the animals that aren't scared of us? Well, that brings us to habituation, which is one of the most important concepts in animal behavior. It's essentially the brain's way of saying, okay, this weird thing keeps showing up, but nothing bad actually happens to me, so I'm going to stop wasting my precious energy being terrified of it. When you consistently remove the negative consequences, meaning the threat of death, that fear response gets actively downgraded. This creates some absolutely incredible rule breakers. Think about city pigeons. They would literally rather get stepped on than move out of your way on the sidewalk, right? They've deselected their fear response because humans literally throw free bread at them. Crows have habituated so much that they actually file mental notes on us, recognizing and holding grudges against specific human faces. No joke. But we also see this out in pristine nature. When Charles Darwin visited the Galapagos, he could physically push marine iguanas into the sea, and they'd just swim right back and sit next to him. And in parts of Antarctica, wild penguins will walk right up to researchers just to inspect their backpacks. But of course, this raises a very fair question. If animals have this deep historical terror of humans, why do we constantly hear about animal attacks? The answer is almost always exactly the same: desperation, not aggression. The vast majority of dangerous encounters happen because of three very specific scenarios. An animal is cornered with no escape route. A mother is fiercely protecting her young. Or, and this is the most common one today, an animal is under extreme stress due to habitat destruction. Take bears, for example. A bear naturally wants to avoid us at all costs. But as human development rapidly expands, the physical margins for a bear to hide just get smaller and smaller. So, when an already stressed out animal with absolutely nowhere to run gets surprised, it goes on the offense as a desperate last resort. That leads us to part 4, the ecology of fear. So what exactly happens when this fear operates on a massive global scale? Well, fear isn't just some quirky behavioral trait. It literally, physically reshapes ecosystems. Look at the famous Yellowstone National Park cascade. When wolves were reintroduced back in 1995, it wasn't just that they ate some deer. The mere presence of the wolves made the deer afraid. Because of that fear, the deer completely stopped grazing in exposed open valleys. And because the deer left, the vegetation grew back. Because the vegetation stabilized the riverbanks, the actual rivers changed course. The fear itself drove massive ecological change. Now, take that incredible power and apply it to humans. A staggering 2018 study published in the journal Science found that across 6 different continents, animals have significantly shifted to nocturnal schedules. Mammals that were traditionally active during the bright of day are now waking up and doing their foraging at night. And this isn't because we directly destroyed their homes. It is simply because we are around. We are a global ecological force literally rewiring the daily schedules of wildlife across the entire planet. Finally, part 5, reversing the fear. The scale of our impact is undeniably heavy, but it brings us to a really fascinating and genuinely hopeful frontier. The absolutely crucial takeaway from this explainer today is this: the fear of humans is not a factory setting. It's installed through experience. And because we installed it through our historical behavior, it means that the landscape of fear isn't permanent. We actually have the capability to uninstall it. Let's move to and see how this builds into real-world conservation. Researchers are proving right now that animals can rehabituate to us remarkably fast. Take the mountain gorilla tourism programs in Rwanda and Uganda. By providing a consistent, highly respectful, and non-threatening human presence, alongside really strict protections against hunting, these gorilla groups went from fleeing rangers on sight to totally tolerating human observers in just a few short years. They didn't somehow forget to be scared. They were just given enough new data points to update their mental models. When we prove consistently that we aren't a threat, that hypervigilant behavior relaxes and natural daytime activity returns. And that brings us to our final thought. The animals that live in places where humans are reliably safe, like certain protected reserves or remote islands, they don't run, they don't hide, they live out in the open, dedicating their precious energy to actually thriving rather than constant, exhausting vigilance. The very intelligence and adaptability that made humanity so terrifying in the first place is the exact same capability that allows us to choose differently now. The landscape of fear can absolutely be dismantled. So the only question left is, are we interesting enough and willing enough to actually change our own behavior to make that happen? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.